Hey, I want to thank you so much for sending in your questions and supporting the blog. I want to be able to get to your questions right away. So here we go. Donna Harris ask, "Are you safe?" So currently we're in Kampala for the birth of our second son, Roscoe, and we are safe. Our home back in South Sudan, they've certainly experienced a lot of turmoil over the past year and a half, but it seems like right now everything's relatively calm. So, Chad Hein Cakes, he asked, "What is the most superior form of meat and why?" So I've eaten various types of meat, from reptile to mammal, snakes and tapir and monkeys and various types of meat. But I guess I would have to say superior meat. I feel underqualified to answer the question, but if there was one type of meat that I had to eat every single day, it would have to be beef. I hope it's not a letdown. I know it's not terribly exotic, but it is certainly delicious. If there was one type of meat that I think is the most delicious, it is the pig. I mean not to offend my dear friends of various faiths, Adventist and otherwise, but I do enjoy the swine. So, on that note, Christian Saracen, he's asking me, in South Sudan, how much concern is there for global news and events? What are people concerned with? Are they most occupied with their daily life? And also, how is America perceived, the West? And how is Islam viewed in South Sudan? So, Southern Sudanese, they're not terribly concerned about world global events. National events are pretty big news. Many Southern Sudanese, I'd say at least one person in each village, has a radio and they can relay the news to others. So they do stay up on various types of national events. However, they are certainly most concerned with daily life. America is kind of this big nebulous thing somewhere close to Europe in the minds of many Southern Sudanese. And so the West is kind of perceived as a unit, simply those of us of lighter skin. Islam is a complicated situation in South Sudan. There are many Muslims in South Sudan, and depending on the region, you can get different perceptions of what is Islam, and that's generally based off of the amount of Muslim population. But I've not seen antagonism. I've not seen antagonism at all between Christians and Muslims, and even between non-Christians of other faiths and Muslims in South Sudan. So, from my personal small perspective, living in Wadab State, South Sudan, it seems like a lot of the conflict, even the conflict historically, has not been specifically over religion, but it's been other factors. So, Dory Pyron is asking, who is your people group and what makes them accept you as missionaries? So, we live with the Dinka Rek. They are a subgroup of the larger Dinka. There's probably about 1 million Rek, so there's a lot of Dinka Rek. And how do they accept us? We spend a lot of time working on personal relationships, a lot of time learning the Dinka language and life, spending time in the villages and being with the people. And so we find that if we can be accepted on a personal level to make personal relationships with one or two of the men in the village, that when I go to that village, that I'm generally more accepted. So I would say it really is. It's the daily discipleship that we do. It's the relationship building that we do, and then we're able to see that expand from one person, one friend, into one village, and then maybe even to one geographic area. Good question. Thanks, Dory. So Hank Azell asks, would you like to live in a camper beside me again? Hank, not only would I, but we should. I think that it would be maybe in lieu of the old folks home, maybe we could spend our latter years living in the woods with a couple old campers. For those of you who don't know, Hank and I probably spent one of the most unique years of our lives living in a couple of old campers. Mine, I think, was from the early 80s. Hank, I think, his camper was from the early 50s. We lived behind the paintball field at Snowbird Outfitters. Um, had a wonderful time. A lot of funny stories and crude jokes came out of that year. So, Michelle Smith says, "What is your toughest adjustment?" Toughest adjustment. That is a really good question, and I guess that would certainly have to do with my marriage. As a good friend of mine said, as a good friend of mine told me before we came, he said, "Be prepared that the marriage that you have in the States is not necessarily going to work here in Africa." And Meredith and I, we have spent these past 3 years trying to reinvent our marriage, um, allow it to become something that the situation demands, and so we do. So now, Meredith and I, we are in our 6th year of marriage, and we have a very different marriage than we did year one back in 2008 with all of its innocence. Things are much more complicated. We have to work much harder on communication, but grace is the most important element for anyone who has a marriage in not only in Africa, but um, in any country in the world. As the kids come, as the responsibilities come, financial burdens, as stressors from various places come, you got to keep grace. You got to have grace for one another, grace for your kids, a daily outpouring of grace. As we receive grace from Christ, that we're able to impart that out to others. Um, yeah, absolutely. Pat Litchfield says, "How do you stay so cute?" Um, wow, interesting. I will have to say this: I drink a gallon of water every single day, and I try to, yeah, I try to keep myself in blue collared shirts, and I carry a handkerchief with me everywhere I go, and yeah. Next question. Okay, so Juan Colon, he says, "Did you experience culture shock, and how did you handle it?" Juan, absolutely, brother. Not only did I, but I am currently experiencing culture shock. Culture shock is not something that you just simply that you get past and that you make the adjustment and then you don't have to deal with it anymore. It's something that is an ongoing process. I mean, and the reason is that people change and cultures change, and as traveling Christians, we move from one culture to another. So we may spend months and months at a time with one culture. We may train people in another culture. We may come out to do hospital visits in another culture. And in a year, we're going to go stateside to a culture that's very different than what we've been doing for these past several years. And it's a place and a culture that my son's never lived in. So there's going to be some adjustments there as well. Donna Fowler says, "Could she babysit my kids when we get to North Carolina?" Absolutely, Donna. That'd be wonderful. Tell you what, you can babysit the kids, and if you could get us tickets to the Biltmore, we will not charge you anything for the babysitting, and yeah, we'll just call it an even swap. Yeah, and we'll love to take you up on that. Cheryl Irvin, she says, so she asked, "What do we eat? What do the Dinka people eat?" So let's see. So the Dinka, as many people in South Sudan, they eat mostly small grains. So that's millet and sorghum. These grains are roasted, ground, boiled. Also peanuts. So they call them ground nuts in Africa, or G nuts. They are a staple of Dinka diet. The way the soil is up there, they grow quite well. Let's see. Also, you have some intake of protein from beef or goats. It's certainly not going to be daily, but as far as us, our routine is, what do I eat? Okay, every morning I have the same thing. Boring. I have oatmeal with honey and cinnamon, and then after that, for lunch, normally we have beans and rice for lunch, and then for supper, our wives they'll cook all sorts of things. So we may have Mexican food or Indian food. We may have pizza, similar to what you'll eat there at your house. Okay, so Janet, my mother Lane, she says, what would you like to eat when you get stateside? It's a very good question. What would I like to eat when I get stateside? You know, it seems like the first year that you're away from home, that's all you think about is what would you like to eat? I probably don't eat beans and rice, but what would I like to eat? I think that for me, it's going to be something, wow, probably going to be something sweet, pastries, I don't know. Hey, Monty Albon, that would be delicious. All right, y'all. Love you so much, and it's getting late out here. About to lose our light. Oh, time's up. Bye bye.